Hello and welcome to today's analysis with me, Jonathan Steele. The 25th of January this year marks the third anniversary of the beginning of the Egyptian revolution, in which Egyptians of all kinds came out together against the regime of Hosni Mubarak. 3 years on, the first democratically elected president has been ousted, while the military have re-established their positions as the main power brokers in Egypt. Today, the country is more polarised than it has ever been. Many believe that the revolution has been betrayed. Some would say it has been stolen by the army and remnants of the old Mubarak system. A violent crackdown has targeted the Muslim Brotherhood, as well as secular activists and journalists. A new constitution enshrines the position of the military, as well as not revising articles that severely restrict human rights. No wonder that many are questioning what gains, if any, have been won in the last 3 years. Joining me in the studio to discuss the troubled state of Egypt today and how we've got to where we are, we have Mohamed Soudan, UK spokesperson for the Freedom and Justice Party, and Tamar Bahgat, a lawyer and expert in constitutional law. On the phone, we're joined by Nadia Abou el Magd, a journalist and political analyst, and on Skype in Cairo by Timothy Kaldas, Professor of Politics at Nile University. But first, let's take a look at this report.
Egypt was always meant to be the leading light in the Arab Spring. The revolution of January 25, 2011 was supposed to herald a new era of democracy and openness in the country. But 3 years on, many believe that Egypt has suffered a full-blown counter-revolution, with the return to rule by a military government after the 2013 coup that overthrew the democratically elected government of Mohamed Morsi and new swaths of laws clamping down on public demonstrations. The recent referendum on a new constitution passed with a 98% yes vote, although there were accusations of rigging, and some people, including the Freedom and Justice Party, boycotted, saying the outcome was never in doubt.
We decided to call on people to vote no despite all the irregularities. No to the Constitution, not just because of the content, but also because of the way the Constitution was produced. The roadmap, which was not voted on, and this authority which has not behaved in a way that can return us to a democratic track.
The Constitution enshrines some liberal values such as equality regardless of race, religion or gender, but it also hands a lot of power to the military and prohibits the registration of religious parties. Defenders of the Constitution claim it will pave the way for democracy.
I came here to present a new Egypt, which a few days ago made its first steps on the road towards building a modern secular state, which expresses the will of the people for a dignified existence.
For many, though, it simply gives power back into the hands of the generals.
The state did harass the no campaign. Okay, so there were few people who were willing to go and vote no. Part of it was because every time the Brotherhood get on the street to campaign no, the adrenaline rises and they start getting violent. Okay, but again, the state definitely did make a mistake. They should have allowed more space for the no campaign. But again, I remember days under Mubarak when there was nothing but a yes campaign. Even physically, media or opposition to the state did not exist. And the voter turnout would be 3%, 4%, as opposed to the near 40%.
For the vast majority of Egyptians, rule by the military is virtually all they have ever known, them having ruled the country since 1952. The parliamentary and presidential elections following the revolution were for the most part a brief blip in an unbroken period of rule by generals. As such, it is perhaps hardly surprising that many Egyptians venerate the leaders of the armed forces, while an international audience looks on in horror at the clampdown on civil liberties and the killing and arrest of protesters. The coup has split old alliances. While some liberals who supported the revolution, such as writer Ala al-Aswani, have thrown their weight behind the military's actions, some, such as blogger Ala Abdel Fattah, now languish in jail for protesting the military's rule. The Supreme Commander of the Armed Forces, General Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, is hugely popular in Egypt and is tipped by many as a future president of the country in elections set to take place sometime in 2014.
I have come to say yes to the Constitution and yes to Sisi because I love him dearly. My kids say that's wrong, but I want him to be the president of Egypt.
In many ways, the political landscape of Egypt has changed dramatically in the last 3 years. In many ways, it has remained virtually unchanged. Power in the country is now held once again by a military strongman. Whether he will agree to relinquish that power in future is the question on the lips of many Egyptians. Alex MacDonald, Islam Channel.
Well, Tamar, let me begin with you. I mean, who or what is responsible for the events of the last 3 years? Were expectations in 2011 too high? Is that one of the problems?
I think coming away from almost 60 years of military rule of some sort, seeing the downfall of Mubarak and the regime at that point, after 18 days of peaceful protest in Tahrir, I think there's nothing more you could have ever hoped for. And definitely with the chance of bread, social justice, and dignity, which keep resounding and perhaps at times now seem to echo rather than being in the forefront of what regimes are pushing for, there was a certain amount of naiveness that existed within the population and all people, but it's something that was just, you couldn't control. Seeing that, you almost have 50-60% of the population were only, were all raised and brought up within the regime of Mubarak, would have never dreamt of the day to actually see that regime just, to some extent peacefully step down and step aside just within 18 days. So the jubilation and the hope, I think, that you had on February 11, 2011 was very high. Now, as obviously the turn of events continued on within the next 3 years, there were many times when it hit rock bottom, and sometimes I'm not sure it's even hit rock bottom itself yet. So we'll just have to wait and see how events turn out.
Well, Nadia, let me turn to you. I mean, what has changed for the better over the last 3 years? Has anything changed for the better?
No, not really. I guess there were some hopes of democracy and, having a freely elected president as well as parliament. So I think we have high hopes, or we had high hopes, and I think we still have high hopes, but actually nothing, at least from the slogans of the of the revolution of the 2011 have been achieved. But something important happened, is that the barrier of fear has been broken, and this is, I think, part of what the people in power now after the coup don't understand. And this is definitely is going to be for the good, because people are not going to settle again for a dictatorship or authoritarian regime, or make this comeback of Mubarak regime and even worse, to sort of really go and settle in Egypt.
And Timothy, can I ask you now a similar question? I mean, having changed for the better over the last 3 years?
I think the one thing that's clearly changed for the better is the sense in the population that they have a say, even if sometimes they seem to want to part with it. There is this loss of fear of standing up to the government. People aren't as easily silenced as they used to be. There's been a lot of bad things that have happened in the last 3 years as well, and I assume we're going to be getting to that in a little bit. But I will say that the society is transformed in a sense, and that's probably the most revolutionary thing that's taken place in the last 3 years, is that society now is not prepared to tolerate oppression indefinitely, and will respond when it feels it should.
Well, Mohamed Soudan, I'm coming to you last, because I know you're not so much in favor of thinking that anything's changed for the better. I mean, do you think it is worse now than it was under Mubarak?
Yes, it is. It is very, very worse than Mubarak era. Number one, we were always talking before Mubarak ousted that the girls and women are red line. Now we have more than 354 young girls and women under arrest. Some of them are very high educated. All of us see how these high-rank policemen, they tortured the women in the street, and they kick them out, and a lot of things like this. That would never been happened in Mubarak's era. Also, there is no kind of judiciary. In Mubarak era, a little bit, there was some kind of judiciary restriction. Now, no way for this. We heard about that 11 years sentences for young girls just to protest. We heard about 17 years sentences for students in other university just for protest. That never happened before in Mubarak era. Actually, there is some kind of democracy in the era of Mubarak. Now there is no any kind of democracy. There is no any kind of free speech. They shut down all the channels which they go against the coup. They shut down any pencil or pen belong to any writer write anything in opposition. Now there is no democracy at all. There is no free speech. President is there ready to catch anyone saying a word against the coup.
Since we're looking back over the last 3 years, obviously, President you supported, Mohamed Morsi, was elected with more than 50% of the vote. How did he manage to lose so much support that people came out behind the military when he was toppled? What mistakes did you make? What went wrong?
The big mistake, I believe, that Morsi committed is that he was very, very cared to build the new Egypt with free speech, with democracy, with new economy, higher economy, good economy, better life for the Egyptian, style life for the Egyptian people. And he forgot that there are a deep state. There are a big corrupted people. They are working beyond himself, beyond this kind of new government. And I think that he has to start with the judiciary, corruption in judiciary, also the police, which he said very very clearly that they are on vacation for 4 years till Morsi finished his term. Then, and also he trusted so much all the high ranks of the army. For instance, Sisi or whatever, or Subhi, whatever, those people belong to Mubarak era. They work with him together. And then, because the promise in the beginning of the 25th revolution that they were going to hand over the power within 6 months, and they did not. Under the pressure of the people and the demonstration in the street, they did after 16 months, not in 6 months. Then he has to be careful from this. He trusts those people, I think, too much.
Okay, thank you. Tamar, what's your attitude on that? I mean, is that right, that the deep state was so strong that one couldn't expect to change it in a short time?
I think, the deep state is strong in Egypt, but I think that was not necessarily the only reason why the downfall of Morsi took place. One of the biggest faults, I think, and we'll see what history has to say about it, is the fact that he was not a president for all Egyptians. He won 50% of the votes, of which 50% of those votes chose to go with President Mohamed Morsi because they didn't want Shafi or a prior individual from the former regime. And just within a short period of time after he took over, we saw that he suddenly was attempting to consolidate his power, and he addressed the nation many times, specifically to his own group of individuals, the Brotherhood members and those of the like. And within a very short span, I think he ended up scaring the rest of the people, including those who voted for him. I think we can't forget that a lot of people who marched on the 25th of January and those who voted for him, a great big number of them also marched between June 30th and July 3rd, requesting basically of a withdrawal of confidence from him. We have, within a span of a year, the judiciary was basically chopped down, the Attorney General was removed, we had executive and legislative powers completely consolidated under one individual, which never happened under Mubarak. In addition to that, we had a presentation where former, to some extent terrorists who had even killed and assassinated a former president was sitting right next to him on October 6th to celebrate a former war. And I think one needs to look at and think of, from the perspective of an Egyptian, it was too much changing too quickly. And I think the fear that was basically brought about was consolidation of power was completely slipping from the state. And this was no longer the Egypt that everybody recognized, but it was one where people began to be afraid of that, it may suddenly turn into some form of Islamic radical state. And Egyptians have always been moderate. The continuous chant has always been, we don't need people to teach us how to be Muslims, how to pray. We just want a president, going back again to the same, slogans of bread, social justice, and dignity. And I think that's the focus that, I think that was the plot he lost, really, is the consolidation apart from that perspective.
Thank you. Let me turn to Nadia on that. We've had two very different explanations here. From Mohamed Soudan from the Freedom and Justice Party, we're told that Mohamed Morsi was too soft, as it were. He didn't go on hard enough against the judiciary, police and the deep state. And Tamar is saying virtually the opposite, that he was trying to consolidate the rule of the party and even personal rule, and was much too strong and too quick to try and put his ideas forward. and get them into practice. Where do you stand on this divide?
In the middle, as I should be, huh? I guess there are elements of truth in both what they said, but in my point of view, Morsi, it's not only that he was soft. I think he was very naive at points. He was very idealistic. I think he also should have recognized and being candid with the people that actually the deep state was acting against him, were not with him, because even if there wasn't this 30 June thing, I mean, I don't think Morsi could have managed to continue to rule Egypt while almost all the states are against him. But again, were they against him because he did something wrong, or they were against him mainly because they are the deep state who were trying to regain and reimpose Mubarak regime, as we saw after the coup. Having said that, this doesn't mean that Morsi didn't make mistakes. He did make mistakes. Maybe he didn't come across as president for all Egyptians, but I think this was a bit also exaggerated. Many Egyptians rejected him. You know, he only won 50%, and many of those who didn't vote for him started sort of like fighting his presidency, trying to undermine him. For instance, cleansing the judiciary. This was one of the demands of the 25th of Jan revolution. But when he tried to do that by starting to get rid of the corrupt prosecutor general, the same revolutionaries who had asked for his removal started sort of like to protest against his removal. So the media played a great role. The deep state played a great role in order to sort of like vilify the Muslim Brotherhood and as their head Morsi, exaggerating the mistakes, exaggerating the fears. And the Egyptians didn't really know each other. They didn't really know much about the Brotherhood except what also Mubarak media and regime was telling about them. They are the banned group, they are the dangerous group and stuff. So the intelligence, the media, all of the deep state really played very hard on these things, which really paved the way for the coup.
Well, Timothy, where do you stand on this? Was Morsi moving too fast to consolidate the rule of his party and himself, or was he too weak and not confronting the deep state strongly enough at the beginning?
I don't think those things are mutually exclusive. I think both are true. The reality is that the Brotherhood, well, first of all, to clarify, the deep state isn't simply the Mubarak regime. The deep state is a bureaucracy that even the Mubarak regime couldn't fully control. If you look at the ministers that were in place in the last years of Mubarak, they basically hired parallel staff that they called consultants to conduct their policies because they couldn't properly control, move, or in any way motivate the bureaucracy that had become enormously bloated with a lot of people who aren't really qualified to be in that bureaucracy but have received their positions because of state policies of distributing jobs based on degrees. And it's basically been some sort of welfare that's been in place for quite some time. So the deep state, it goes beyond the regime, actually. It's a thing unto itself. So, yeah, Morsi couldn't control it. Mubarak's ministers couldn't really control it completely. And that's not surprising. However, with respect to his naivete, I would agree that he was naive, but I wouldn't agree that he was naive with good intentions. I would say that he refused to try to reform or coalition with the opposition and the rest of the revolutionaries in challenging the control of the security apparatus over the state. Instead of challenging the police, he increased their wages. He appointed ministers of their choosing. I mean, the best indication of that is that the Minister of Interior under Morsi is today the Minister of Interior still. He empowered the military in the constitution that he passed. And I think that his view was that he could hope to co-opt the military. And this mistake's not a new mistake. We're actually 60 years on from when the military banned the Brotherhood in 1954. And what happened in 1952 was the Brotherhood made a deal with the Free Officers that all other political parties would be banned except for the Brotherhood. And they would work with the Free Officers to establish their power, the power of the free officer coup. And after 2 years, when they had served their purpose, the military disbanded with them. And once again, we're observing a similar situation. It's unfortunate that they continue to repeat this mistake. And unfortunately, the NSF is continuing with the same mistake, where it's trusting the military over a handful of nominal positions when it really does not control the state. And so this process is continuing. But I think that the failure on the part of the Brotherhood is that it didn't coalition with the other organizations and political groups. It broke its promise of governing through consensus, and it made itself isolated and vulnerable, so it was much easier for a coup to be conducted against it.
Okay, well, I think on that very strong note, we'll have to end the first segment of our program. We'll be coming back to talk about the Constitution, what General Sisi's plans may be, how strong are his ambitions to become president in the second half of the program. So stay with us. Thank you very much.
Yeah.